I'm Katherine Klosek, Director of Information Policy and Federal Relations at the Association of Research Libraries, ARL.
Hi, I'm Katie Zimmerman. I'm the Director of Copyright Strategy for the MIT Libraries. I'm sorry, my voice is a little bit weak today.
I'm Rachael Samberg. I am the Director of Scholarly Communication and Information Policy at UC Berkeley.
Katie and Rachael are the authors of a forthcoming book on licensing that ARL is going to be publishing along with their co-authors. And I was really excited when I first learned that they were working on this project because I see it as an important piece of our kind of collective, ongoing, continuing exploration of contractual override, which is an issue that we'll hear more about from Rachael. I had an opportunity to draft a brief foreword for the book, and in it, I reflected on how the authors, all the co-authors, have really demonstrated how licensing strategies can be a tool to achieve public policy priorities and advance library missions, particularly in the areas of accessibility for people with disabilities and, of course, computational research rights for researchers. So that's a bit about ARL's involvement in the project, but let's hear from the authors. Starting with Rachael. Please, Rachael, tell us about the book and how it will help libraries negotiate for computational research rights.
Sure. So some of you who know me might not be surprised that I think law is very prevalent in libraries, and there should be more lawyers in libraries. But the truth is that law affects so much of what we do within libraries. It affects accessibility, as you've heard. It affects digitization, the publishing agreements that authors sign with publishers, and also the content that we provide access to. And in that content that we try to get access to, most of which we can't purchase anymore, we have to license, and those license agreements are extraordinarily complex. They involve many, many areas of law. You have to make sure that the accessibility provisions in your license agreements comply with various standards and requirements. You have to address privacy issues of your users and of the material that you're licensing. Of course, copyright. What rights are you getting for your scholars to make use of the materials? Are you protecting their fair use rights? And then also just general contractual obligations, like, are you responsible for the acts of the people who are of your authorized users or who are making use of the materials? Or what warranties do you need from the publisher to indemnify you if you happen to get sued for people's use of the materials? So there are so many areas of law that emerge within our electronic resource agreements. In particular, this has really heightened with computational research because of something that Katherine mentioned called contractual override. So basically, you probably are all familiar with the fact that our users in the United States have what are called fair use rights. That's part of the US Code, Title 17, Section 107. We get to make fair uses of copyrighted content. Except that in the United States, we are also a jurisdiction that allows private contracts to take away those statutory rights. So in all of those electronic resource agreements in the US, we now have to ask publishers to preserve rights that they're trying to take away, and that your scholars need for doing all of the computational research that they're engaged in. This is not a problem in the European Union and more than 40 countries in which there are laws. So in the European Union, it's the Copyright Digital Single Market Directive, Article 3, which protects the right for all research institutions doing scientific research to make use of materials without having a contract take away their research rights, and also under the recent AI Act in the European Union, which says that you can use AI to do text and data mining on these materials. And again, contracts can't take away the right to use AI to do text and data mining, and no copyright owners can opt out of having their works used for text and data mining and AI training for text and data mining. Again, for research for scientific research within research institutions. Different rule outside of that context. So we have this unique disadvantage in the United States where publishers can take away those rights, and we now have to work very hard and engage in a lot of labor to try to preserve them. All of that happens in the context, as I mentioned, of a lot of legal issues that arise. And if you are in a position of having to train new colleagues to do electronic resource licensing, you will find that there just are not materials available that address the legal issues of electronic resource licensing. There is a lot of really great work that has been done on how to negotiate. And I need to read that. And a lot of work on how to manage electronic resources, but not on what it actually means, what you're signing, and what you need to understand about the law to make sure that you are getting everything your institution needs and everything that your scholars need. So Katie and I and the other co-authors have been in a position of having to develop our own training courses from scratch. Mine is 2 months long. It's called Samberg Law School. And you'll learn all of the basics, and you'll get practice agreements to work with. But of course, that's not scalable. What we really need to do is make sure that as a profession, we are empowering people to learn to understand the law as they enter these roles. So that was the long-winded impetus for this book. We pulled together people with legal backgrounds to write something to explain provision by provision in any agreement what they actually mean, what the law provides, what they should be looking out for to enable people without legal training to be able to do e-resource licensing.
And you really emphasize kind of that this is a practical guide about how to license for computational research and preserve those rights. Katie, can you talk us through how the book will work and sort of the value that it'll have for computational research?
Yeah, totally. So as Rachel talked about, it's a very practical guide. One of the things that it provides is model language. This is not new, and we've borrowed from the existing resources that exist. If you just need a clause for inserting text and data mining rights into your contract, there is a lot of excellent model language available out there. This is the one that is in the book. It's adapted from the CRL model license, and those. But that's really not it. That's the beginning. Those are the things that are already there, and then the things that build on that are the things that we couldn't find elsewhere. So that's great when you're starting from scratch, but frequently you're not starting from scratch. You're starting from language that the vendor gives you that is maybe good in some areas and bad in others, and you need to know what to negotiate and what to pull in and how to write the things that you actually want to write. So next clause. So this is an example of that. So this clause is, it's fine. It's a good starting point. It's saying you can do text and data mining, but it's got some problems. And in particular, it's got a problem that you have to delete the data after you're done. So next slide. So the book will walk you through getting to something that's a little bit more like this. So it's taking the language that's there, it's adapting it, it's saying, we can delete some of it. Maybe you get 10,000 records and you only end up actually using 7,000 in your analysis. So maybe you no longer need those 3,000. Maybe that's something we can agree on. But for the data that is actually included, you need to be able to retain that for validation and data integrity. Sorry. So the book will help you do that. The book also walks through the reasoning behind it, so that if you're new to this, there's a lot of received wisdom in this field. There's a lot of you have to strike that indemnity. Well, why? Well, because the general counsel told someone that in 1990. So we're trying to explain all of that too, so to make it a little bit more usable.
Cool. Thanks, Katie. We do want to leave time for Q&A, so maybe in 5 minutes left or so.
We have 10 minutes left to talk, and then they can.
All right, fair enough. You're the boss. Rachel, can you share an example of how you've advanced your library's mission through licensing?
Yes. For those of you who were at the wonderful Yale presentation that we just came from just a minute before this one, you heard me talk about accessibility. And there are new federal regulations for what are called Title III institutions Title II institutions under the Americans with Disabilities Act that mean that we have to ensure that the content we make available, web content, which electronic resources is considered, is accessible under a standard of WCAG 2.1 AA. So we need to ensure that everything we're bringing in meets that standard. Otherwise, we're going to be in a position of having to remediate everything to comply with the regulation. So we can do this in a number of ways, but we've chosen to use licensing as a key way to ensure that our content comes in accessible. And the way that we do that is by we have a couple of ways. One is we have the vendor, first of all, just provide us what's called a VPAT, or a voluntary analysis of what their roadmap is, basically, to get to accessible material. But in the license agreement itself, we have them represent that they warrant a warranty and representation that they comply with WCAG 2.1 at the AA level. And we also prevent them from refusing to indemnify us if we get sued, let's say by scholars who are trying to use it and the material, and they find that it's not accessible, and they sue the library. Well, we've got this representation from the publisher that it came in as compliant. So now the publisher has to indemnify us. And so those are just some of the ways that you can use licenses to achieve the library's overall mission of, in this case, making material accessible to all.
That's a great example, Rachel. Thank you. Katie, do you have an example from MIT?
Sure. So just briefly, AI is a strategic priority for MIT. It's a strategic priority for the libraries. It's probably in all of our professional development goals and everything. And the thing that is happening in licensing with AI is that our patrons are using our licensed resources with AI, and the license contracts are starting to include language about AI. I think it's very essential for us at this point, when these things are first being negotiated, to step in and encourage the direction that that's going in. That's how we have a voice in that particular conversation.
Okay. So some positive examples. So now, Rachel, are you willing to share some challenges that you've experienced when licensing e-resources?
Sure. I'm here to let everyone down. The challenge is also around licensing for AI training uses, and that's the main issue in licensing with that right now is that publishers and also the Publishers Council don't understand how AI is actually used in research. So their initial reaction is, no, bad, stop, you can't do anything with it, without realizing that for at least 10 years, people have been training non-generative and generative tools to work with all of this licensed content, including the content that they're now trying to license to us and prevent us from using with AI. And there are all of these published papers that show exactly how the material has been used with AI, and that are used with tools that in no way could ever reproduce the licensed content. So it's been a real struggle to show publishers and their lawyers how they're overreacting. If you go to the next slide. So what we've been doing is showing them examples of published papers and explaining to them, walking them through exactly how the technology in that paper, the AI tool in that paper, used the licensed content to train. So here's just an example that I put in a recent blog post that I did with Dave Hansen from Authors Alliance that shows that chemists used a natural language processing tool to extract all sorts of properties and information about chemicals from licensed content, and then released a database with all of the chemical properties, but also the trained tool so that you can show it different papers and ask it different questions. Go to the next slide. So how the book comes in is by actually presenting case studies for people to use and to walk through in doing these kinds of negotiations. Of course, we focus mostly on the law, but where we have also sort of the practical expertise at the intersection of the law and negotiation, we've tried to put that in too.
Great, thank you. I bet you're all wondering about the future of this project and what's next. Katie, do you mind filling our audience in on kind of what they can expect?
So the book is, the parts that are currently written are available now. They're at the link that was in one of our slides. So we're releasing it openly as we go. As we peer review it, it gets better as it goes on. We're planning to have kind of version 1 complete by this January. But then after that point, we're going to continue to work on it. We have a lot of ideas for things to add, chapters that could be added. We want to add exercises and clauses so that there are a little bit more teaching materials along with it, and appendices on legal aspects.
Could you just flip to the last slide? Just to give you an example of the kinds of appendices that are already there, but also how we want to expand it. The bulk of the book goes clause by clause through an e-resource license agreement and explains the law as we go, but there's also an appendix that gives you basics in contract law to understand, like, how do you understand a contract? What happens if there are conflicting terms? All of that we wanted to include, but we'll expand those with additional appendices that include exercises with sample agreements. As far as long-term future, that is a really good question. I mean, it's possible that there could be a grant, if anyone's willing to fund it, that has kind of a long-term sustainability, because it's great that Katie and I and the other co-authors were able to come together and do this work on top of all of our other work, but are we going to be able to update it in 2 years as all of this has changed? And so I think bigger picture, we have not solved what the longer-term sustainability is for it.
Thank you for sharing. I think we want to hear your questions, but I also want to note that we'll be at a breakfast roundtable tomorrow morning if you want even more FaceTime with the authors. And we'd love to hear your questions or comments.
Got one. Hey, Emily Gore, University of Georgia. Rachel, my question's for you. You talk a little bit about case studies, and I really appreciate that the book actually gets down to giving us some of those case study examples. But one of the things that I'm finding is when we're kind of working these licenses, that it would be really good to have case studies of my own on my own campus instead of pointing to others. So I guess I'm just asking for advice on how to gather those case studies on our own campuses so that we can have them to work with the vendors.
And can I just ask you one question? Are you speaking specifically, like, mostly in the
mostly
computational?
AI, TDM, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The best way, in my opinion, to do that is to have the librarians who work with faculty who are doing this research speak to the faculty to understand exactly what's happening on your campus. It's very easy to do searches in Google Scholar to find the kinds of studies that that have incorporated it in the past. But when you're able to say, well, on our campus, this is what our scholars are doing, this is what they need to tell us what rights they need. If I explain what an agreement clause does to a faculty member, we can sit together and say, well, this would have prevented you from doing X in your project, or I need the ability to do Y. And I know that sounds laborious, but you don't have to do it forever. But you need to build up the language to be able to say, I have a better understanding now of how this language actually impacts the kind of research that's happening on my campus.
I could ask you this question when we get back to work, but why not now? So you spoke about negotiating with publishers. Could you talk a little bit about negotiating for computational rights, AI rights, with information aggregators? I'm not going to name names. And how that would, how you would have to take a different approach, what some solutions might be.
I can go ahead. Okay. So, I mean, I think they're one level, at least one level removed in terms of copyright ownership and licensing rights themselves. So they're absolutely going to say no, because they're worried that they can't license those rights. What I would say right now for information aggregators is you don't necessarily need an AI or even a TDM, a text and data mining clause in your agreement. As long as you preserve fair use but don't have some separate clause later on that takes away those fair use rights, your users already have the right to do text and data mining, including training AI to do that text and data mining.
Say it louder. That's awesome. Thank you. Sorry I panicked about the time. We do have plenty of time, so please.
Do you have any advice for libraries who do not have control over the licensing process, that's centralized on their campus with contracts and procurement? How can we advocate for our needs with those constituencies?
Do you want? Okay. Go ahead. Poor Katie. Okay, so that is it is a challenge, and really the best thing in my view, because we've had to do this too, even though we have some leeway in licenses and in licensing, but you have to build those relationships with campus council and your procurement team, which is actually going to be harder in some ways than campus council. But I can promise you that no matter what institution you're in, the council does not understand the unique needs of scholars and the particular ways that publishers endeavor to restrict uses in license agreements. For better or worse, I've had to work, I love our council. I know some people have different experiences, but I have worked very closely with our council because there are limits on what our university librarian has delegated authority to sign. We have to achieve certain outcomes. Well, because of the relationship I've built with council, they know that I understand what those outcomes are. And so they trust that if I'm able to edit an agreement to meet those outcomes, and even if you didn't have that leeway to decide what those outcomes are, you can get council to change what the required outcomes are if they better understand what it is that you actually need and what these agreements are trying to do.
And I think the thing that I'd add to that is gather examples. So you're going to need examples of how this is problematic for your users and for your library. So even if you are not currently involved in the negotiation of the licenses, you should know what's in them.
I think we do have a few more minutes for questions, but all right, yes, Micah.
Hi, thanks for your work on this project. I think it's super helpful for staff that are engaged in this. Do you have any advice for how to approach this process where there's pressure to get the deal done? I know this helps shape things, but we've got staff and we've got pressure to say that really want to read the Atlantic, and they're having trouble with some of the terms.
Yeah. That's just Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday. Yeah, so if you think, it sort of depends on the issue within the license agreement. That is your sticking point. If you take something like computational research and training AI to do it, we've worked to get, within the University of California, we've worked to get the UC president to issue a statement saying, you should fight for these rights. But if we were on a Tuesday to say, no, we're not going to sign this Springer Nature Agreement because it doesn't have this. Would all of the faculty be okay with us walking away from this large deal because of this particular issue? I don't think we're there yet with, to be honest, I don't think we're there yet with text and data mining and AI, because I don't think there's quite a large enough understanding of how research is already using these kinds of techniques. But I do think that for something like accessibility, there is a very firm mandate. We have to get this. There is only maybe 1 or 2 workarounds, and council has told us no. That's communication work that the library needs to be able to, to plan in advance for. Like, here's what we say to scholars if we can't get the Atlantic because of an accessibility reason. But it really is kind of issue specific in terms of walking away.
You shared a lot of great advice, around building relationships and understanding how researchers are using AI and understanding clauses. It might seem daunting, right, to get started. Is there advice that you have for folks when they go back to their library to kind of get this ball rolling or to accelerate the licensing work that they're already doing? Or not?
Read our book.
And maybe also read a license. Like it seems daunting. It seems like a daunting legal document, but it's like advanced reading comprehension. It's fine. You all can do it. And if you don't understand what the clause is saying, then it is fine to ask that question, because you should know what you're agreeing to.
Yeah, I mean, it'll also help you with like rent and insurance and everything else that you have to read. Like, start getting familiar with contracts, and it's actually very satisfying. Like, you see the way a word, I know. You see the way, like, the use of one word can be altered to have a dramatically different effect on, everything that you're getting access to. So I do think that with the right mind frame, you can get a lot out of the experience.
Thank you all. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Rachel.